Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 38th live stream from the Misfit Gamer Studios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. Today is going to be a very fascinating day because I have a topic that I have been looking forward to. Our main topic for today is going to be talking about introducing pop culture, both references and characters, and even just general pop culture lore into your setting and into your lore. And basically, I just want to talk about things that I've done in the past, how basically, pop culture references are kind of at the heart of High Point, especially for me in terms of how I built it, kind of like talking about, the origins of High Point in that deep dive series that I did earlier. You can go check that out on YouTube, by the way, at MisfitGamersStudios. And from that, you guys can see that I have a lot of pop culture references. I have a lot of things that have influenced it, from the Dresden Files series, Doctor Who, and, various other, references. Just basically everything that I really like. Even the Split Infinity series, one of my favorite book series, is really literally at the heart of High Point. And it really shaped the entire aspect of how I built High Point from the very beginning, even in the before times. So I want to talk more about just, how I go about doing that. What are, my rules of thumb in terms of how I go about taking that information, how much do I want to implement, and how I keep it consistent in my realm. And hopefully that can give some ideas to all of you on how you might be able to do that yourself, or, give you some ideas about how you want to approach it. But also to show that, there's kind of a general idea that I think a lot of people slightly look down upon this, for taking those ideas and shoving them into your game. But, the fact is, not everybody can be super creative and create their own entirely unique, lore and world and setting and all of that. And at the same time, you have all of these beautiful creations already, just because you've seen it, like, if you've watched Doctor Who, playing in my game isn't basically watching a Doctor Who episode. It will have, Easter eggs and hints to it, and it will be in a reference that you'll be able to appreciate, but it's not like watching the show will give you insight into the world. And that's kind of how I like to approach it, is, with more of a loose reference than a direct, I'm going to use this verbatim, because that's more of building a tabletop around the genre or around, the reference, instead of implementing it and introducing it into your lore. So anyway, that's going to be the major topic that we're going to talk about today. But first, I do want to get to kind of a subtopic, more of a viewer question that I got from Cosmic in the Discord. You can ask questions in the Discord too. Boom, I need to do that better. But yes, so I really liked this one. I was originally just going to shoot the answer out on Discord like I normally do. This wasn't submitted through the normal questions that would normally be answered on stream. This was just kind of a direct question in the general chat, but I liked it so much that I kind of wanted to cover it because it is a good topic. But the more I thought about it, the less I realized it was a whole episode topic. So I wanted to just kind of handle it up front and kind of talk about some of the things that I do, because I have a structure of how I approach it, but it's not something that I have like a rule book for, in terms of, how rules is written has it. So I kind of wanted to approach this a little bit early on in the conversation, answer this on stream because it's a really fascinating question. I think it really will help also build more of the High Point lore, and then we can get to our main question. So let me go ahead and pull that up here. So, excuse me. Here we go. So from Cosmic, through the Discord, we have a question coming in that is asking about how to dish out or how to give out XP for new DMs. So essentially, as a new, so his question was, for a first-time DM, which leveling system would I recommend? Is it XP per kill? Is it a milestone base, or is some other kind of leveling system? They were planning. Cosmic was saying that he was planning on milestone, but was just curious about what other options there are other than XP per kill. And then, based on what little I know about his homebrew world, what do I think just initially? So I really liked that question, and I really wanted to tackle it more from let me talk about what I do and then actually answer the question, because there are a couple different ways to handle this. And I see that Cosmic in chat was saying, in terms of incorporating pop culture, yes, even memes. Absolutely, you can and should if it works without too much disruption. But we'll get into that when we get into that other topic. So let's talk about granting XP, especially as a new DM, because this is something that I struggled with early on, and I really wasn't sure how I wanted to do it, because Cosmic in the Discord goes on to basically kind of give his interpretation of or his opinion about XP per kill leveling systems, and I agree that they are not the best. And the reason why I don't like it is for two reasons. Number one, depending on how it's implemented in similar fashion to what Cosmic said in the Discord, if it is a XP per kill per character, it's a terrible asymmetrical way to level the party, and it does not produce a well-balanced party, and it also creates almost a difficult, I don't want to say animosity, but it does create a difficult culture within the party, because everybody wants to level up, but if you have someone who is more heavy-handed on that is going to get the kills, having the party trying to work through that and have a situation where they get the enemy down, but then try to let everybody have a kill shot every now and again for leveling purposes, I think is just a not good mechanic. I think it's broken. I think the idea of getting experience for a kill over experience for the entire fight doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? If the encounter has a 500 HP, it's a 500 HP encounter, and you do 2 damage, but it's the last damage. Hey, BCM, what's going on? Welcome. Thank you for joining. But you know what I mean? Like, if you do 2 points of damage, but it's the last points of damage, how does that give you more insight and more understanding and a better handle on your skill sets and your tactics in a fight than the person who spent the last 5 minutes tearing down that 498 points, right? Doesn't do a whole lot. Just doing PCM, just doing the normal roaming around. Well, I do what I normally do. Well, I appreciate that you roamed your way in here. It's very good to see people in chat. I always like to see the chat start to pop off a little bit. Hope you enjoy yourself. Hope you stay for a little bit. And if you don't, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. So I agree. Leveling by kill, essentially by who gets the kill shot, I think is a bad system. I've seen it in video games, and again, it's the same concept. Why are you having to prioritize who gets the final shot when the entire battle essentially happens? So talking about some of the other examples that Cosmic had brought up. So milestones. I don't disagree with milestones, and I think this, to answer your question more thoroughly, for first-time DMs, not necessarily for you, but for first-time DMs, milestoning, I think, is the way to go. Hands down, it's the way to go for 2 reasons. But we have to pause on those 2 reasons, because I said that there were 2 reasons why I didn't like XP per kill, and I only went over one of them, which was it doesn't make sense to give someone the final kill and more XP than the person who did all the damage. The other reason why I don't like XP per kill is that it's more designed, like the reason why XP per kill I think came out or is a general idea is it's a great concept for when you've pre-made your encounters. So if you've if you've designed your encounter, if you've pre-planned it, if you are one of those kind of people who can pre-plan all of the details and you basically have it all set out and your encounters are kind of like the focus, then the XP per kill kind of makes sense, or at least the XP in total of the encounter makes sense in that case. But this is the other reason why I don't do it and why I don't like it, is because it is better used when there's more pre-planning and more foresight, whereas a lot of the times my encounters, although I have ideas in mind of what's going to happen and who they're going to encounter, of course, it always depends on my players and their actions, and that's going to dictate exactly how those encounters roll out. So I don't like the idea of setting up the encounters too much ahead of time, depending on what my players are going to choose. And I just don't like doing all of that heads up math to kind of basically lock them into a number. So I'll get into what I do specifically to break away from that. But now going back to milestones, 2 reasons why I really think milestones are great for new DMs is, one, it really helps new DMs generate a good flow of the game, because if you're going to do it every gaming session, like if each gaming session, kind of like how you see in podcasts where every gaming session is a large portion of the campaign, and the next gaming session is going to be a time lapse to where you're at the next portion, or the next big interaction, or the next encounter, however you want to do it. Milestoning works great. And that's why I really like it, because it helps keep a flow of the game, a flow of all of the progression of all of the party, and it keeps things simple. Everybody is level 1 when they start, and the next time there is a milestone, everyone's level 2, then everyone's level 3, and you're not worried about having people added up. You're not worried about people keeping track of it. You're not worried about anybody accidentally getting it further or behind in terms of the level up process. It's basically, you're taking into account that when it needs to happen, it happens. So keeping track of it's really good. I think the second part is also, I think it's one of the better ways to establish yourself as a DM, is having a gameplay that is more, more directed at the Let me re-say this. I like that the milestoning helps new DMs focus more on their storytelling and their narration and pushing the story and the plot along, and less about what they're implementing into the game to give out XP. That's what I meant to say. I just lost all my words there. But those are the 2 reasons, is because A, it keeps things well-paced for the party and the DM, especially when you're new. And I think it really helps teach DMs how to pace their narration, because you're not worried about building a big enough encounter, or, oh, this encounter wasn't enough XP, so now I got to throw in 3 more just to get them to the next level before this big thing happens. I think that, as much as that's not really a big deal, because really you can just plan around the story, you can plan the story around where they are. I just think that if you're doing it by milestones, you're more focused on your narration, you're more focused on the story and where the characters and the players are at in the story. And then if you have those milestones, whether it's, after a certain encounter, after a certain, checkpoint that they make, or if you're just dishing it out based on how the whole party is just interacting, and the better they're getting, the more leveling up you want. However you do it, I just think that is one of the easiest and best approaches for new DMs. It makes things a lot smoother, and it really allows people to focus more on what they need to focus on. The players don't have to focus too much on where they're at, because it's going to happen for them, right? They don't have to worry about when they're going to reach level 3. It's going to happen based off your schedule. And the DM doesn't have to worry about properly building out encounters and all of these situations to dish out the right amount of XP to get them to those levels. It's just going to happen. And you have a lot better organization IRL for developing those level up sessions, right? Depending on if you have players who can level themselves up, if you're doing it online, so it's going to automatically happen, or if you have sit down sessions where you help everybody level up, right? So I absolutely would always suggest milestones when you're starting out. Cosmic says, before I forget, I do have another question as well about taking damage and concentration. I will read that. Don't let me get off topic. Let me get through this question and I'll read that real quick. But yeah, but I do want to get to that question too. So yeah, so I think milestones are great for new DMs. It helps with a lot of different aspects with your gameplay. Now, other leveling systems. So one thing I started out with, I tried to do my own leveling system, and I ended up getting heavily influenced by my prior DM and how he did his. So I'm gonna kind of give you the progression of how I got to where I'm at and what influences he gave me. So when it came down, when I was very first starting out, before I really had a handle on how to dynamically create my encounters and dynamically allow for my players to interact and affect what's going on around them. So I did try to have some preset encounters, or at least some, really rough models of what they were going to run into based on the gaming, the day that we were gaming, right, on the session. So what I would do is based on what I built, I would try to research on the book in terms of, especially if it was a 5th edition or a 2nd edition monster, depending on where my influence was coming from. I would look at the source material, find out what the XP for that enemy would be, right? And then, depending on the modifications or the situation I put the players in, I would tweak that number, right? So if I knew that the encounter was going to be in their favor, I might drop the XP a little bit. If I knew that it was going to be slightly out of their favor, or if I had modified the creatures in any way to be slightly more difficult, or just not what they were expecting, I would alter it accordingly. And then there were other times where I would just look at the XP and be like, that's just flat out stupid. I'm changing it. And then I would just change it to what I felt more appropriate, again, based off of other factors of high point, other things that I've done. So I would say that led to creating a pool of XP, and instead of the idea of dishing it out by kill or anything else like that, this is where I started to get influence, because at first I was like, well, what if I just took the combined total? So if there's 3 enemies, take the combined total of all of the XP they were supposed to get and dish it out equally. And then, I was thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, so I run into the problem, if you dish it out equally, you run into 2 different issues. First issue, especially because I'm playing 2nd edition, foundationally I'm playing with 2nd edition. So every class will level up differently. So without doing milestones, everyone's going to level up differently regardless. That already is an issue. It's not really an issue. I actually find it kind of fun. If you could, as a DM, can keep up with it, having players kind of, pop up every now and again with new stuff is kind of fun, but it is very disruptive to most of the gameplay. And some players just don't know how to deal with that, being a lower level than the rest of everybody else for a time. So I thought about that, and I'm like, yeah, I really don't like how the level progression is going to work if everyone has equal. And on top of that, it doesn't really account for, same thing with the final kill, right? It doesn't really make sense if someone's doing all of the damage, but everyone's equally sharing in the XP. I don't like that. It doesn't work with the concept of high point, so I wanted something more. So going back to the little that I remembered about how my DM did XP, because we didn't do XP all that often. It wasn't like he did XP every single session, but he would update our XP every couple of sessions, so pretty regularly. That's one thing I don't do. I do XP level ups actually rarely. I actually dish out XP pretty rarely, but I'll get into that in a second. But one thing I did like that my DM did is he had different categories of XP. And that is the one thing that I took, because I never really knew what his methods were of calculating XP. He never let us know. All he would do is give us these categories. And that's kind of what I took away from gaming with him, is I like to dish out XP in terms of a pool, but I rate the amount of that pool you get based off of a couple different factors. Yeah, it sounds like quite the experience. So first and foremost, you get essentially 2 different main pools. You get party XP, and then you get individual XP. So party XP is exactly like my first idea. Party XP is a pool that gets equally divided among all players. And I initially create the party XP based off of what I think the encounter or situation I've put them through. I kind of give it a value. So if it's a pretty decent puzzle and they're going to have to do a couple things, I might assign the whole puzzle like 500 XP, equaling. And sometimes I'll do it as simply as, I think this puzzle should take them in game / out of game this long, and that's equal to this type of fight. So this fight would be equal to 500 XP, so I'm going to give this puzzle 500 XP. Or if as I'm building the puzzles, I will think of little different aspects and just kind of piece it together, make it make sense, right? And so everything that the party is doing is going to get they're gonna put into that pool. So when they talk to certain, NPCs, I'll give them XP for that. I just kind of keep it in my mind of who they've talked to, what information was really exchanged. Like if they do really well in the conversation, I'll give them a little bit more. So, if they're talking to an NPC and, I might just baseline like, hey, if they talk to this NPC and they don't completely ruin it, they're going to get 150, to the pool. But if all of a sudden they're asking the right questions and they're like really making me think and challenging me, I'm like, hey, that conversation turned into 300 XP just like that, because they asked some really unique questions, or they got, the NPC to do something I didn't think they would, or, something like that, right? So everything that they do, places that they visit, conversations that they have, enemies that they fight, all go into this party XP. So I give out the party XP, and basically everyone divides that equally, and that's going to go to their characters. Then we have personal XP. Now, personal XP are things that I create based off of the players playing their character, character tie-ins. Like, so basically, if you are playing your character well, if you've done something or incorporating something from your backstory, kind of like what the ideas if you would think of as giving inspiration points, I kind of just look at that as, if you've done something really good for the party, for the game, if you've challenged me, if you've made me think, if you've added value, all of these things can gain individual XP. And the reason why I do that is because, again, if you're the barbarian, obviously your job is to be tanky. So I don't necessarily want to give you XP for taking a bunch of damage. Excuse me, guys. I don't want to give a bunch of XP just because you took a bunch of damage and dealt a bunch of damage. I mean, you are the tank. That is your job. Yes, you did a lot of the fight, but if everyone is equally putting into the fight, right? If the wizard is basically, by the end of the fight, if the barbarian took most of the damage and dealt most of the damage, and the wizard expended all of their spells, and the cleric did their healing, if everybody put in and played their role, I'm not going to give anyone semantical XP, right? Like, yes, barbarian, you dealt more damage than anyone on the team, but you wouldn't have done that if the healer didn't heal you, and you wouldn't have done that if the wizard didn't, use hideous laughter to knock him prone. Like, there's so many things that I look at to where it's like, you're not going to get what I call semantical XP because you played your part and you're trying to break down, well, I did more damage, so I should get more XP. It's like, that's not how it works. Now, if you did something in the battle, regardless of the amount of damage you did, that turned the tide of the battle because it was something that you thought of, not just you critted. Well, I mean, and I do give XP on crits, but like if you specifically tried to, disable the character by taking out their leg instead of, doing just a regular hit, if you tried to disable them, and that turned the battle because their mobility was their biggest, strength, that's something that I would reward bonus XP for on the individual level. So this is also a way for individuals to vie for XP instead of just sitting around waiting for it, because of course everyone's going to get their group XP, which is based off of the world that they're interacting with. But the more they interact with me, the more they talk to NPCs, right? You could have a conversation and you're going to bump up that group XP because you're part of the conversation. But if you chime in, ask your questions from your character's point of view, you personally will get more XP for that, right? So I have those two main categories, and that's basically how I like to break it down because it for me makes the most sense. I know my old gaming group, my old DM used to also do XP for loot. I don't do that. Mainly it's just too much numbers, it's too much math, and I don't necessarily agree with that concept. Just because you got and found a bunch of money doesn't make you better skilled at your weapon. It doesn't make you better understand how to track an animal, right? Like the idea that finding gold makes you better, unless you're turning that into schooling, I don't buy it, right? So I will award chunks of XP for treasure gained, but not a direct 1-to-1 ratio of like coin value to XP. It's more like if you discover the treasure, if you unlocked the chest that had the gold, or if you found the secret room, those are all things that would grant you the XP because you got the treasure. But I don't think that the 1-to-1 ratio of coin to XP would make any sense. So that's pretty much how I like to do XP, because it makes it simple for me. I can judge XP based off of what I'm putting them through, how they're reacting to it, the unique things each player is doing, and what value they're adding into the game. And from there, that usually works out to be enough XP for pretty large jumps. Now, going back to how I dish out XP, I do like the milestones, but it doesn't always make sense for the storyline. And that's the thing that I have personally a very big problem with in terms of being a DM. I'm very bad at timing leveling with the progression of, because like in the sense that in 5-6 gaming sessions, normally you'd get an XP session, or you'd get some XP by that point. But if that 5 or 6 gaming sessions is in the same location doing the same task, or if my players are really interacting with things and in game it's only been a couple days, going from level 5 to going from level 3 to 6 doesn't make a whole lot of sense when it's only been a day or two in game, right? And that's something that I try to deal with in terms of, I don't like giving out XP every single gaming session, because the idea that you're going to level up and gain things literally overnight doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what I tend to do is I make a modification to the 2nd edition rules. Whereas I replace, unless it's something specific that my players want outside of their standard level up, like if they want to start to like put new proficiencies or new skills. Usually what I will do is, because of the way that I divvy out XP every benchmark of time frame, or when I feel like they've encompassed the campaign. So, if they're going to go and I have like, hey, you need to do all of these things to get to the next part. If you guys are going to do all of this, that's when I'll give XP, when you've, kind of reached that benchmark where everything I was calculating is kind of in that bubble. And I try to time that out also with in-game time, so it kind of makes sense for the character. So a lot of the times when I dish out XP, it's a lot at once. Not always enough to instantly level up, but usually 1 or 2 XP dish out sessions, and my players are leveling up. But again, I have a problem with trying to keep it making sense. So one of the downsides, my players are normally understandable of this, but one of the downsides is it can, depending on the gameplay, occasionally it can take a long time for some of my players to level up. But the reason for that is it really, again, depends on their activity in the particular situation that they're in. If they're going to spend 3 or 4 gaming sessions in a conversation, or, prepping for a battle, that's just going to extend how long it's going to take them to get that XP. But at the same time, I'm rewarding them because all of that delay is also padding up all of the XP that they're going to get. So when it comes to dishing out XP, like I said, when it comes to being new, I would say milestones are the best. It keeps the storyline going. It keeps you focused on your narration, and it keeps the players all in line. But when you want to start branching out, and if you want to start doing individualized XP, I would say that, giving some sort of pool. And then even if you don't want to do individualized XP and keep 2 different XP pools in your head, do the party XP option, and then basically have it equal at the start of the gaming session. And I guess this is kind of my actual suggestion for you, Cosmic, from what little I know about your realm, but from how I know you like to DM and how you're building things, this is more of my opinion for you. Make a party pool of XP that you would, at the start of the gaming session, or at the start of when you think, between the start and the end of when you're going to give XP. So whether that's per gaming session or 3 gaming sessions or at the end of this encounter, however you do it, what I would say is at the beginning of the gaming session, when that XP is starting to be gathered, put everyone at an equal. So if there's, however many people there are, give them all an equal percentage, right? however, I think you're running a six players. So what is that, like 22, 23%, something like that, or 21%? I don't know. I'm bad at math when it comes to that kind of stuff. But give them all equal percentage, right? Just you're essentially saying, here's the pool, and everyone's going to get an equal amount. Or yeah, because it's way easier math. And then what I would do is, as they're gaming, make adjustments to the percentage. And if it's by one gaming session, make it by, every time you adjust it, make it by like 5%. But if it's going to be over a couple gaming sessions, make it like by 1 or 2%. So if someone goes above and beyond, knock them up a couple percent and then knock everyone down. Like again, if there's 6 players, knock one person up by 5 and everybody else down by 1. And that's all you have to do. Is if you can keep that math going where you're just calculating literally plus ones and minus ones, or just plus ones to each character, at the end you can essentially say, hey, you got 3 plus ones, but this person got 2. So that means that, you guys get more percentage. And you're just going off of small percentage points, but it would be enough to show that you are highlighting when they're being more valuable to the game, to the party, and to the narration. But when you're doing those percentages, it's easy math for you, right? You're only having to pay attention to when they shine. And all you have to do is keep like a tally, right? So if this person got 5 tallies and that person got 1 tally, then you know that everyone else is going to lose at least 3 points each, and then you're just going to bump these guys up, right? And at that point, it makes it easy, because at the end you're like, hey, the total XP is 5,000. You get 30%, you get 20%, and the rest of you get 10%, or whatever it ends up turns out being. And if that's not really balanced enough, do the group XP, and then again, just every time they do something special, make a tally, and then just set a flat 50, 100, 150 XP for every tally you got. Those are what I would suggest for you at the beginning for your realm, just because I think you kind of want that more dynamic. It sounds like you want more of a dynamic party. So you kind of want maybe having people like on the cusp of leveling up, or someone else just leveled up. Unless you really want it to have the entire party constantly at the same rate, then obviously go milestone. But I think doing a party pool and then just notating when someone's doing a little bit better, maybe they're going to get a little bigger cut. I think that would really work out with the way that I've heard your realm working so far. But I'm really curious to know what you think, if you like that idea, or if you like any of the other examples I gave. But great question. I really liked that question. That was fantastic to just really wrap my head around, because it's been a while since I've actually thought about XP, because I've just been doing it so long. I haven't really explained it before so in-depthly. So that was really fun. And then Cosmic also says, I would like to do milestone and use the XP as a secondary currency. Not bad. Used via telling stories about a specific encounter or something similar, like a bar performing a song. It required performance or history check, or both the advantage, averaged out modifier. If history is a +2 and performance is a +4, then they can do a storytelling check with a +3. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think milestones are probably a good way to go. But yeah, XP rewards are always a cool thing. It just, again, it depends on how you want the party to be leveling. Because High Point is so focused on the individual players' narration, right? So I might have a party of 4 players, but the way that High Point works is each of those characters is really living their own story. They just happen to all be working together right now. And that's really how I run it, which is why I'm always really big on giving players the agency to have their own agendas, to have their own personal player secrets and character secrets, and really play for that, right? Because having them play their character and do something that would behoove their agenda, even if it doesn't quite fit with the party's agenda at the time, you make more unique and dynamic gameplay, because again, it gives me something to work with, and it gives the party something to react to, instead of just everybody always saying, yes, the party, it's always about the party. We're always going to do exactly what the party needs to do, because that's, most D&D sessions are, I think, party-centric games, right? They are always focused on the party as the entity, with all of the players essentially controlling a different limb of that entity. I like to approach High Point more as each individual player and character of theirs is playing their own game, and they're just happening to run into other people, basically just an MMO kind of concept, right? So whether they split up or not, I feel like that the reason for that, or that not the reason for that, I believe that is a perfect reason to give them individualized XP, because if they do decide to do their own thing, they will need to be of the adequate level and not the adequate level of a party they're no longer with, or just because that party is progressing, if their character isn't progressing for that same, in that same respect. I want that dynamic gameplay. I want them to be able to have that control over their character's development. And then before we get to our main topic, I want to go back to your other question real quick. So before I forget, I do have another question as well about the taking damage and concentration. So if a creature lands a hit with a held weapon or a natural weapon that does 2 damage types, let's say Wraith with a necrotic plus piercing slashing claw attack. Okay. So attack has 2 different types of damage. Gotcha. Is the concentration DC based on the total damage, since it is 1 attack, 1 hit, or 2 separate rolls, 1 for each damage type, 1 for the necrotic, another for the piercing? I know the book says DC 10 or half of the damage, whichever is higher, but the book doesn't say anything if the creature who had 1 attacked. So as far as I understand rules is written, I understand that it is a single attack. So it is a single, even though you're doing multiple types of damage, it is a single damage roll. So you are going to only do the 1 DC check. And the way that I interpret it, at least just specifically with the example you gave, is they are piercing you, but the attack is what left the lingering necrotic damage, right? So it's kind of like a spider bite. A spider bites you, but the venom is what causes like necrosis, right? So it's kind of essentially the same thing. It was caused by the attack. It's not essentially one and then the other. You're not getting hit twice. It's the attack is also having a lingering effect. Now, the reason why I say that, and I wanted to bring that up, and the reason why I say that's how I interpret it, because I like to make a concrete visual for how I see rules as written. So that's one of the reasons why in that example, rules as written, I would understand why it should do 2, or why it does 1 damage. Now, in High Point, typically, and for this exact example, for the reason I stated, it would just be a single roll against concentration, because in this example, the attack by a Wraith, the damage also becomes necrotic. Like the wound becomes necrotic. It doesn't attack you with the piercing damage and then attack you with something that is also necrotic. Kind of, again, going on with the idea that if you were bit by a spider, the venom that they give you is in the spider bite. So it's not 2 types of attack. It's the byproduct of it. And depending on the situation in High Point, that doesn't always happen to be the case. There are rare cases where a particular damage type can inflict a multiple, like concentration check, or in other cases, it can have a dual effect depending on how it's delivered and exactly what the situation is. So this is the dynamicism, of what my characters and players can do. So I'm trying to think of a good example, but I guess one example I guess you could say is like if you hit someone with like a tranquilizer dart, the initial attack would be a concentration check, and then the constant attempted effect of like the poison, you could say if it's like a, if it's like a delayed thing, you could say that there's another one. One idea, depending on how you read Magic Missile, because some people say that Magic Missile hits all at once. And I don't know if I agree with that, if all the missiles hit simultaneously or if it's like one after the other. So that's a good example of, depending on how the DM wants to run it, you could say something like Magic Missile could be a consistent check 1 missile after the other, unless you say that they all hit at once, and then, you're just kind of, playing that semantic game with your DM. Yeah, I don't have in a specific example that I remember happening off the top of my head, but I would say that High Point rules, yes, there would be situations you could justify trying to say, hey, I think this attack will make them, make multiple checks. But otherwise, I would say, I would kind of lean on rules as written for the majority of them. The 2 damage types, it's like being stabbed with a red hot dagger or a red hot poker, right? It's already red hot. It's not that you're being stabbed with piercing damage and then you're being hit with a fire attack or a heat damage. It's the fact that you were pierced with something that's hot. So you got pierced, and then the byproduct of the heat, the heating aspect is that you're also getting burned. So, again, in that respect, it's still one concentration because it's all originating from the same thing. Here we go. Good example for you. Your grenades that your artificer is creating. I think it's your artificer, right? The specialty grenades that you are homebrewing in your thing right now with your DM. Those you could justify as 2 things. Like if you wanted to throw the grenade and hit the person, but the grenade isn't the purpose of the grenade isn't to do physical damage, it's to explode and then do its thing, or shatter and then the chemicals do its thing. That could be justified. You could say, hey, I'm not only going to throw my grenade, but I want to hit him in the face. And then I want it to drop. So I want to hit him essentially hard enough to break his concentration, but then when it drops on the ground, it's also going to explode. Then it's going to do its thing, and then he also has to take a concentration. That right there, I would say, is a perfect example of when High Point would say it's 2 concentration checks. Because getting hit in the face with a grenade is 1 concentration check, and then it falling and then exploding would be the second, because that's its actual intention, that the grenade, that's its action, whereas hitting him in the face was essentially a bonus action of throwing the grenade. So unless you threw it hard enough and the grenade shattered on his face and exploded, then you'd have to make the argument. Now we're getting semantical, so I'm just gonna break it there. But that's a great example of being able to make a double constitution check out of 1 attack. But otherwise, I would just say it's probably stick with the rules as written, single attack. And then, so Divination Wizard, Valor Bard, the wizard side of his magic is what makes the item. Another simpler question, can resistances stack? Like a Red Dragonborn's natural resistance to fire plus an item that gives fire resistance plus a magical buff given such an ally. If they do stack, since they are from different sources, how would it take to effectively become immunity? That's interesting. So, as far as I know, we're going to look this up. As far as I know, rules as written, you can stack. In High Point, you absolutely can stack. Let me verify. Let's find out. It's going to take me just a second to look all of this up. And then I want to see if... Here we go. Okay, so rules as written. Resistances of the same type do not stack. Player's Handbook, page 197. And there's a whole paragraph about it not stacking. Let's see if I can actually get the... So yeah, in 5e, for example, natural resistance at level 6, but again, type... These 2 features will not... Yeah. So very specifically, one of the examples that were given was a draconic character who had acid resistance, and their class at level 6 gave them more resistance, and it does not stack. So yeah, rules is written, page 197, multiple instances of resistance or vulnerability that affect the same damage type count as only one instance. For example, if a creature has resistance to fire damage as well as a resistance to all non-magical damage, the damage of non-magical fire is reduced by half against the creature, not reduced by 3/4. So when it's the same type, even if it doesn't say it. So again, fire resistance, magical resistance, but when it's from the same type, they don't stack. So there is a case for rules as written, no. And even Crawford agrees with that. Now, for High Point, there are obviously some exceptions. So with High Point, I would say that certain ones will not stack, but depending on the source, yes, they would. So I could understand, if a dragon has natural resistance and then they become a class and that class gains a resistance, I don't see why those should not stack, because those sources are completely different, right? And if you were to get a ring, now you could say, we could make the argument, because this has actually never come up. I've actually never had a player try this. So you could make the argument that it should be the highest percentage, right? Because if you have a natural resistance to something at, let's say, a 10% chance, or, like 10% resistance, right? And then you put on a ring of 5%. You could make the argument that they stack and they gain 15, because it goes through your natural resistance and then the ring charges and then it does its thing, right? Because then you could, basically how I would look at it from a High Point point of view, it's a layering thing, right? So it stacks, but it's not stacking in the sense that it's one number. It's not like one giant resistance. I would look at it more like it's a layering resistance. So it's going through all of the layers of protection. So if you have a natural layer, but that's not connected to the ring layer. Now, I could see some DMs making the argument that it should just be whatever the highest is. So if you have a natural resistance to something, and then for your race, and then your class gives you, if your race is one stat and one resistance, and then your class gives you another resistance, but it's lower, I could see some DMs saying, well, you're just gonna have to take the higher of the two, right? If you put on a ring that is of a resistance type of equal proportion, it won't add to your resistance. I don't know if that really makes sense in High Point terms. I think that it would make sense for some mechanics if people don't want to be too game breaking and they don't just want someone to be able to put on 5 rings of the same type. Now you could do that, right? If I get a ring of resistance of one type, I can't just put on 5 of those and stack them all, right? Because that source I could see cancels itself out. But if you're going to have something from your race and your class and a magical item, I would say that in High Point, those would stack, but again, not so much as they're all one encompassing protection. It's more of you have multiple types of protection layers that the spell would have to get through. But yeah, I'm also very surprised that they don't stack in any way whatsoever. But yeah, apparently it's the whole thing. But good questions. Thank you so much. Excellent questions. So we are, okay, we're under an hour. We are doing great on time. So, everything's looking good. We are all good from chat. All right. So let's talk about today's main topic. This is something that's just, again, like I said, it's at the heart of High Point. It's something that I've been really interested in talking about all week, and I really have no idea where to start, but we're just going to start on it. So, as you all know, for those of you who watched my deep dive on the origins of High Point and the subsequent episodes with Kage asking me more questions, you know that pop culture, the things that influence me in the real world have absolutely come into play and influenced me in my D&D realm and in High Point. Specifically, at the very heart of High Point is the anomaly, which is essentially a link to Phase, which is from the Apprentice Adept series, book series universe. So that is at the very heart of everything that I created, on top of all the D&D lore. And you guys heard me kind of talk about how I layered each of those, right? So I have all of the D&D lore that inspired me on how to discuss, the great adventure Zenith went on to get here to High Point, and then how getting into High Point has been influenced heavily off of the Apprentice Adept series. And even within that, I've talked about how I've included, Doctor Who references and the Doctor Who universe concept. And so, in doing that, it sounds like I've done a lot. I know it sounds like it can be tremendous to try to keep all of that going. And that's what I wanted to talk about because I know that there's a trope about, every DM is basically like complete when, when you've basically plagiarized all of your favorite fictions. And it's like, yeah, I get the joke. I like it. I have fun with it. But I think that really comes down to, the trope comes from like two approaches that people try to take. Is one, trying to basically take their tabletop and manifest it into a tabletop based off of that reference. So, it's like, I mean, it's basically how, like Dresden Files. The Dresden Files has its own tabletop game where it basically has its own book, its own rule sets, and everything else like that. And so I think a lot of people try to do that, and I think that's where the big trope came from. But I also think that for a lot of people, I think that it can be off-putting a little bit when it's too on the nose. I think that for a lot of DMs who incorporate the things that they like, but it's too direct, for me, I kind of associate it to the uncanny valley effect of like, robotic faces being almost too human, but not quite human enough. So there's that like peak at which it gets almost too human, but then it actually like really affects you. And you're not really like enjoying it anymore. That's kind of how I feel like the influences can be in sometimes for DMs, is when they're trying to influence something that they really like. I feel that a lot of people can be put off just by the general idea of, oh, that's almost too much. Like, I don't want to play in that world. That's cool that you did that, but like, I thought we were going to do this over here. So, I can understand where a lot of people like make fun of the concept that people have that. But at the same time, when you're talking about being a DM, you're talking about being a storyteller. You're crafting a narrative in a make-believe fictional world. And not everyone's a storyteller. Not everyone's a fiction writer. Not everybody can write a book. Not everybody can write an anime series. So but some people who can't do that can also tell a great story. They can narrate very well. They can keep a concept going and be consistent with it. And so when you find something that works for you, when you find something that resonates with you and that you can remember well and that you can keep consistent, I find that only a benefit to your gameplay. I don't necessarily think that should be looked down upon, because not everybody wants to read dozens of D&D books about D&D lore. Some of it's just dry, some of it's boring, some of it's cliche. I'll admit, I don't like probably a good 40% easy, just downright, just don't even bother with 40% of anything D&D related that's been written, just because it's like it doesn't really add enrichment to my world and to my game. And I think that's a big, a big diversion in a lot of players with D&D, is those that are all about, 100%, what has been written. And again, not just the rules and how things are supposed to be done, but again, the lore. There's a lot of people who dive into that lore and want to strictly stick to that lore, and that's great. But for those who want to branch out, sometimes the easiest way to branch out is with something that's familiar, something that something that you're not only comfortable with, but something that is just ingrained in you, right? Like, we all have TV series, book series, movies, other universes that we know that inspire us and ignite our imagination. And I think that those are I think that those are extremely beneficial opportunities that I think DMs should not rely on, but should lean on in times of when they need that extra inspiration. But again, when you go too far and when you make it to where you're essentially trying to recreate either the full effect of that world, or even worse, and I think this is really the hard part, is when you're trying to basically recreate it as it was, right? So let's say you take an anime and you want to have the anime influence your gameplay. Basically putting your players through an episode of the anime is going to be very difficult unless all of you are really into it, and that was the idea from the start, right? But I think this is a lot of times where that cliche mindset comes from, is people will try to do that. They will try to essentially recreate an episode, or they will literally just put a character from whatever their influence is into their game, and then try to like quote, that character from that reference and try to, make it fit into the game. And those are the times where I think that the DM has to take a step back a little bit and judge the room, because a lot of the times I think when it doesn't work, it's when the DM is just so psyched about doing it and they're more interested in their personal role play than they are in the delivery of the role play. So yeah, bigger idea on this is too much is not always, a good thing when it comes to the influence. Now, what does that mean for High Point? How do I approach it? How do I use it? Essentially, I keep everything loose. So I have my nerd outs, right? I grew up being a huge Marvel nerd. I love Doctor Who. The Dresden Files is one of my favorite book series that my wife turned me on to. The Apprentice Adept series was one that I've always enjoyed throughout my life. And all of these aspects, there's dozens out there that have influenced, my imagination, who have influenced how I think and how I solve problems, and the things that I create, the things that I come up with, have been influenced by all of these things. But I think one of the benefits is I don't have the best memory. So even if I wanted to recreate like an episode of my favorite anime in game, I probably couldn't. So I think that is one of the benefits that I have naturally that got me to this point. But at the same time, by learning through playing with other people, other DMs, and in other gaming sessions that did have those references a little bit, pushed a little bit too hard, I found a comfort in keeping a loose reference to those things in game and in narration, but the ties that I keep to those pop culture references are more in my mechanics. And that's how I keep my consistency while not breaching too close to that uncanny valley aspect of plagiarizing, something that everybody knows. So what does that all mean? So looking at, let's take the Apprentice Adept series. That is where I got the idea of phase and proton. And, when we're talking about it, obviously we're talking about, I literally just said, being too much on the nose is a difficult thing. So obviously the fact that I have phase and proton and basically the direct book series living there, which technically is a place that you can go visit. Yes, obviously that's exactly against what I normally would say is on the nose. Now, the reason why this one in particular is a little bit different is because it is not something that is normal in the sense of this is not an aspect of my game that most gamers, if any of them, will ever interact with. It's all really tied up in the lore. It's tied up in the backstory of High Point, and it's there serving its purpose, serving the purpose for combining all of the ideas that I have, making the lore make sense, and being there for the mechanics and the physics of the realm. And it, of course, by having that, by that proxy, it is something that can be interacted with the players. I don't have anything in my realm that they can't interact with, but that is why that one is a little bit different, because it is at the source of High Point, which is why it is a little bit more on the nose and pretty much just a direct reference. But it's not meant to be interacted with. It's meant to serve the purpose of the lore and the story. So not the best example to start with, but I wanted to get that one out of the way because that is the most direct reference that I pretty much use in everything, because I do use the characters, I do use the setting, I do use all of the mechanics and the physics from that book series, at least from the first 3 books specifically. But the reason for that specifically is more about my personal lore and the fallout mechanics from having that as, the heart of High Point, because it sets up all of the other aspects of magic, not just the lore, but the magic of the realm, how the realm actually operates, why it's so big, all of that aspect. So, moving on to the next bigger references, right? So I would say the top 3 references, obviously, the Apprentice Adept series, but after that, because that one's so steeped specifically in the lore, The next two references that really do influence how the gameplay works, I would say the top two would be Doctor Who and Dresden Files. And the reason for that is when it comes to like Doctor Who, I do have an NPC that is, I don't have the Doctor in my realm. So that is like one of the things that I wouldn't do because, you know, again, it would feel a little bit too much to have that type of a character and play that type of a character and have that kind of interaction. But I do have a character, I do have an NPC based off of them, based off of that kind of a concept of a traveler who basically is always at a different time and place. But in terms of the Doctor Who universe, what I get influenced from that series is how I let time flow in High Point. So yes, technically you can meet the traveler. I call him the professor, but you can meet him. He is an NPC. He serves his purpose, but it's not like an NPC that I'm throwing into every gaming session. And like up to this point, none of my players have ever met him, right? It's an NPC that I have, again, to serve a purpose, but it's also a byproduct of the Doctor Who universe that I wanted to bring in, right? I wanted to at least have, obviously I wanted to have some sort of reference to the Doctor, but I didn't want to bring the Doctor in. But in terms of how like time flows through High Point and how I operate my gaming sessions and the flow of each plot point, each campaign, whatever you want to call it, for all of my characters and their gaming sessions, I'm really big on how Doctor Who explains the concept of fixed times and times in flux. And that concept really, really influences how I've operated and how I've basically built out High Point. Is when I came up with the idea, or when I had that idea come into High Point, having times that are fixed are excellent, because essentially, if you use the idea that I get from Doctor Who of there are some points that just have to happen, it really allows me to make really good decisions, or like really concrete decisions on like the historical lore. And it gives me opportunities to, build out those narrations, right? Whether it's like, in terms of like talking about the lore, kind of like what we did with the deep dive, or in game having an NPC recall something. Those details won't ever change. And I don't really have to think about it. Once it's written, it's kind of set. And those are great because they help with the past lore. But having times that are fixed also are kind of fun, because instead of like some DMs who are like, I have an idea for an encounter and I'm going to make this encounter happen. It's kind of like when I have a fixed time in the future of someone's gaming session, it's not so much of a, I'm going to railroad them into being here. It's more of a, I know that for the general purpose and for the general progression of High Point, there are certain events that will and have to take place. Now, whether or not my players will interact with them is the unique part. It's the fact that there will be things that happen and the players have the chance to run into them. But if they don't, I know that they're going to happen at certain key points for the general progression of the High Point storyline and of the thing, the general like story and overall historical lore of High Point. Now, it's not like I have a large future of a bunch of fixed points happening, but every now and again I will have an influence. I'll hear a song. I'll think of what an NPC is doing, and certain things will click, and I'll be like, so it's most likely going to lead to this. And then based on how important, that outcome is, right? So if I have an NPC who I haven't thought about in a while, and he's been trying to, let's say, take over an area, or I have it kind of planned out to where, there's supposed to be like a war between kingdoms. If I haven't thought about that in a while and characters are getting close, I can basically say like, okay, there is going to be a war. Like that is going to be a major turning point in High Point in this region, and my players are going to have to deal with the fallout. So I may decide that based on the importance of that and based on other things that my brain starts to do, because if I think about that being a war and I think that's a good idea, I'm going to start building the fallout from that. And once I've built too much, you kind of don't want to it's going to be kind of hard to undo all of that for myself. So certain fixed points in time happen when it really, if that happens, it makes it a lot easier for me to narrate the story and the fallout. Now, unlike Doctor Who, or I guess more similar to Doctor Who, those fixed points in time are more or less the fixed outcomes. So in the example I just provided, those two nations will go to war. Now, why they go to war, who wins, may be the thing that's not fixed. Maybe just the fact that they go to war is what's going to be fixed, right? So that's where the players can and do come into play. They can change the details and they can get me to figure out how that's going to happen. But for the most part, I'm not going to railroad them into decisions that they have to make in order to make it happen, or even if they try to, stop it. I'm not going to say that they can't succeed. If these two, if they really wanted to put it in, into their gameplay that they wanted to stop these two nations from going to war with each other, and I had it as a fixed point in time that they would go to war, I don't like the idea that I'm going to railroad them away from it, but it's basically going to be, one of two things. I can just increase the difficulty of what it would take for them to do so. But if they're really that determined and they really wow me and then they go that far, that fixed point in time, I keep loose in the sense that if those two nations had to go to war, who said that they were, unless I said they were going to go to war with each other, what if they teamed up and went to war with somebody else? And that war subsequently did all the things that I needed it to do. Those are the kind of things that I mean in terms of like the fixed point in time. Kind of also ties in with like why I have the prophecy in the realm, is because the prophecy also kind of lets me keep, loose track of things that I kind of want or need to happen. But the details of how they need to happen and when they're going to happen are kind of up in the air. So when my players are going through and gaming, they're not running into creatures and enemies, that you would see in the Doctor Who series. They're not running into the Doctor. They're not going to find themselves a TARDIS. That kind of stuff isn't really going to happen. But how I run High Point, how I decide, even historically, there are times in flux. There are times that I think are like really great parts of the story that are great parts of the lore that I would love to have a player like play through and see actually how it happened, have those conversations that I've had in my head with NPCs and play it out, basically like give them like, essentially like cutscenes, or let them interact with people and go back in time and do things and interact with stuff. And some of those times I like to keep in flux because, especially with the flux moments, when I can see that the outcome of certain moments won't drastically change what I've already written, like hard-coded into High Point, those are a lot easier to decide that they're in flux, which is pretty much a lot of situations, right? The majority of times situations are very easily considered in flux, both future and past, because of the dynamic nature of High Point and what I want to create for my players. But when it comes, especially so when I'm looking at the outcome of a certain situation, if that outcome really wouldn't change anything, future-wise, that's something that the players can go back in time and possibly change and interact with, and kind of have that feeling like, they go back to their time and I can retcon some things that, again, story-wise don't drastically change their gameplay and don't drastically change the story I've told, across multiple players and multiple gaming sessions. But when it comes to those fixed points in time, especially if I give my players agency to interact with them, I have to be very careful in how much interaction they're allowed, and I have to be very careful on what factors need to go into that fixed point in time. But a lot of the times it doesn't come up in that respect. I don't have players trying to abuse the idea that they have the agency to make changes, and so if they hear of something being fixed, they're going to go do everything they can to try and change it. Because again, it comes down to being a good DM. If your players are trying to manipulate the system to be against you, use the system against them. I mean, if it's a fixed point in time and they're really trying that hard, it's still going to happen. But again, they can play with the details, and that's, I think, more fun. I think it's more fun to let them play with the details and see if we can make the situation more entertaining, or even just a better story than what I created. I think that can be a lot of fun, but I think railroading them into saying, well, it's going to happen, so you either can't do anything or I'm going to force you to do certain things, I think takes away the fun of trying, right? Like the idea of, the trope of going back in time, trying to save someone from dying, and by saving them, from getting hit by a bus, they trip and fall and break their neck, right? So it's like, no matter what you do, the outcome's always going to be the same. I find that more entertaining and more in line with how to tell a good story than to just railroad them into saying, no, you can't kill that person, or no, you just physically cannot try and stop, right? I like the idea of making that attempt and seeing the consequences of their action, and again, making it feel more of a living consequence. Like, again, this is a fixed point in time. The universe is against you on this one, and you can do all you want, but sometimes fate, destiny, and the universe just will not allow it. And I think that's I like that I'm so much more comfortable with that than I am with just saying no, because I wrote it that way again. And I'm very big on making sure that High Point always has an explanation, always has an answer. It's never just because me, the DM, said so. So excuse me. Going on to the other example. So for the Dresden Files, if you haven't read the book series or haven't done the audiobook, I highly suggest it. But again, I do have an NPC, and 2 of my players have interacted with this NPC, but it's part of their storyline that they're going off on right now. But I do have an NPC that's based off of Dresden, and a lot of the loosely, a lot of the details that have happened in the Dresden series are tied in with High Point. So there's that character's a little bit more easy to manage. But when it comes to, again, the Dresden series, I did not take a heap of the characters from the series. So obviously I have an NPC that's based off of Dresden. I have an NPC that's based off of Thomas. And I have an NPC that's based off of the Fae. But in terms of I don't really specifically have one based off of Michael. I don't have one based off of is it Karen? Murphy. There we go. I couldn't remember her name for a second. But yeah, so it's I don't have all of the main characters out there. Basically, what I took from Dresden was basically she's Faye now, so that I already covered that. But yeah, basically, I have a couple the 2 main characters that I him and Thomas that I have characters based off of. But in terms of that reference, again, all of that is mechanics. It's all based into the lore. So I took a lot of the setting, the back setting, not the modern day Chicago from Dresden, but all of the magical settings. So the fact of the Never Never, the fact of the existence of the Fae, the way they see it. So I still do have the Fae Wild and other areas that are still D&D specific, but I like the way that Dresden explains the other worlds more. So the way that he explains the Never Never, the way, and going into the zones of the Fae areas, like the Winter Court and the Summer Court, I've always looked at that as a much better explanation for what D&D has. And so when you go to the Feywild, that's just another category of zone, similar to the Winter Court and the Summer Court from the Dresden series. And that's how I explain a lot of the the hierarchy of the Fae comes from the Dresden series. Even some of the back end lore of High Point kind of exists, and we'll go over that in a different episode with Kage, because a lot of the stuff that I really took liberty in changing in terms of the D&D lore, in terms of the phlogiston, the crystal spheres, why they were created and what Zenith had learned. A lot of that is actually influenced off of the Dresden series, and how the Fae work there, and what's going on in the background with like the Winter Court. If you know, you know what I'm talking about in terms of what Queen Mab has to deal with and what her real job is. But if you don't know, I'm not going to give away anything because it's also just deep lore at High Point. But you know, so obviously I also have classes. I built several. I went over in one of my series. I went over. Oh, actually, I'll still have it written. 3 months ago, I wrote all of this. All of the custom magical classes that I created, on top of the D&D magical classes that I created, most of those were spawned from the idea of Dresden, right? So, you know, obviously I took wizard, right? I created my own wizarding class, or wizard class, not wizarding because it's not Harry Potter, but I took my own wizard class directly based off of how like Dresden likes to use magic, right? And all of the variations there. And then even the sorcerer class, when I created the sorcerer class where you can create spells based off of things that you find and imbuing them, and then that's the spell, like the little item that you made. You know, that comes directly from you know, the description in the Dresden Files about how he does potions, where you have to have an item or a piece of the potion for every one of the senses, right? You have to have something that does all of that and then something that ties it together. So I wanted to, I liked that idea so much that as a wizard in my class or in my realm, you can make potions that way. But at the same time, the sorcerer was kind of built off of that mindset of being able to piece together the fragments of magical energy into something whole. And even the warlock, the warlock idea of being able to learn all the different types of magic, just never like all the way. Same kind of concept of, because it takes so long to learn magic, I liked this idea that there, you know, are basically gatekeeping of magic, and then warlocks kind of broke that, where they were able to just absorb as much of magical knowledge and magical proficiency as they could. So a lot of what I took from the Dresden series is mechanics based and lore based. You can go to the Never Never. You can use the Way in my realm, and the way that the Fae work. So I mean, the Summer and the Winter Court pretty much work roughly the same way. And the hierarchy there works the same way. I only mainly use the big name players just because it's easier that way, and then they just have all of the infinite minions that I can create. But you know, like Queen Mab is an NPC that players have been able to interact with before, and again, storyline wise, kind of tying into prophecy and all of that kind of thing. But again, when I add these things in, I don't have the intention of expecting my players to play through the Dresden Files series. I don't expect them to play through a specific chapter or a specific book. I don't expect them to need that knowledge to enjoy the references, because for me, incorporating the references, they're a nice Easter egg for anybody who knows. But again, I don't fully agree with adding something in for the WoW aspect. You know, not adding in pop culture references just because you think it sounds cool or you want to play the character. Because again, I think that can turn players off unless everybody's in on it. You know, you're doing like a whole, like I've even thought about running a gaming session with like a bunch of Saiyans, like let everybody actually run like a different type of character build, but they have like Saiyan background or something like that. You know, to where like every time they do death saving throws, they get a level up or something, right? Like really unique ideas in order to really like spice up the gameplay. But again, I've learned on myself with my own, you know, my own experience. When you're too close to it, when you're too close to the reference, it's almost off-putting. But you also don't want to rewrite the reference, if that makes sense. You know, you don't want to take something that's well known and essentially say I'm doing that, but then literally change everything about it, but just use the reference to, you know, call upon the idea, but then basically just, you know, wash out all of the actual details. Because I think that's also off-putting, because you know, there's obviously some sort of expectation when you say that you've entered that in. Like when I say I have Doctor Who influence, anybody who knows a Doctor Who has some sort of expectation of what that means. whether that's actual gameplay, NPCs, or again, how time works. But when I tell people, yeah, the way that time works in High Point is very similar to how it is explained in Doctor Who, there's an expectation, right? So if they say, oh, so like there's fixed points in time and there's times in flux and it's all wibbly wobbly, and I'm like, no, time is linear and nothing ever changes. Then they're going to be like, well, what do you mean it's like Doctor Who? They're like, oh, well, because you can travel time, but you just can never change anything. It's like, but that's not how Doctor Who works, right? Like, that's not how it works. You're able to go and interact mostly with everything except for some very unique situations. And that's what I mean by I don't want my players to feel like they're playing an episode of Doctor Who, or anything like that. But I also don't want them questioning, well, what part are you using here, because it doesn't make any sense. And that's just kind of the road that I try to travel on when I'm thinking of what influences I want. Another big one that I have in my realm, more specifically for the NPCs, but also just for some more interesting ways to make encounters. I really like the Supernatural series, and in the concept of creating certain pantheons and how to create certain types of encounters. And I don't just mean battles, but I mean like, whole encounters for like the party, like going into a town that's being ravaged by some mystery creature and having them to hunt it down. Those are things that I've taken from like Supernatural, right? So again, not having my players replay an episode of Supernatural, but taking an influence on how to set up a good hook for getting the players to want to go after a monster, and taking examples from how they do their build up to revealing the monster. And I also really like the idea of having reference materials that are in-game lore based that help them defeat certain creatures. So there are certain things in my realm that, you don't just go fight. You would have to figure out how to take them down. And again, I kind of liked the idea of the way that Supernatural did it in terms of its trial and error until enough people have done it, and then there's reference material. So having like small hunter guilds is something that I have in my realm that specifically go out and fight these very unique creatures that are almost like rare versions of D&D creatures. And again, sometimes I use like real life lore, like Supernatural does, and sometimes I just take a D&D creature, modify it a bit, but then I give it the presence of like a supernatural creature where it has some definitive characteristics, things that they can discover, and then getting that into the story to where it feels fresh, it feels like D&D, but there's that familiarity, there's that, oh yeah, that is kind of like Supernatural, like it's like terrorizing the town, and like, yeah, we gotta like find it. It's all in the setup and the narration of the story and not in the direct gameplay. And that's a lot of the ways that I try to approach taking these pop culture references and putting them into my game and putting them into my lore. Is it's walking that fine line between making it familiar, making it work, but also making it unique, right? And those are the 3 steps that I try to take every time I have an influence that I really want to represent in my realm. Is I want that familiarity, right? So with Dresden, I have an NPC. With Doctor Who, with Supernatural, I have some of the NPCs, right? Like for High Point, if you hear me talk about the history, and if we ever talk about the wars and like some of the big players in the wars, you will hear me reference the Dogs of War. The Dogs of War are 2 very powerful NPCs. They were basically human who established themselves to immortalhood. They've basically been around since the dawn of High Point. They are some of the very first non-saints that were created. They were some of the first humans that have just continued. They got very powerful very early on, made a lot of good deals with people. But essentially the Dogs of War are referencing Sam and Dean, basically brothers who have who originally trained against, again, before the War of the Fallen, before the War of Power, way back in the day when, I was in High Point's early days where power was just basically being used willy-nilly with, no abandon and no limits. They found a living off of going after these high, powerful, unique creatures that that all of the different, gods were creating, all the saints and all of the things that they were trying. And, that got that got some people's attention. Their knowledge became something that was, sought after. Gods would hire them to go and study what other gods are creating to defend themselves. They became very good at basically being infiltrators. They got very good at being hunters and learning how to go after different creatures and different people. Essentially, again, just loosely based off of what they did in the series, but not so much so that I'm just going to drop them in and, make people feel like they're watching an episode of Supernatural. It's just more to be there for that, oh, they're brothers and they like do all this stuff. I was like, okay, that's really cool. But I want that story to be fresh. You know what I mean? I don't want to basically be reading the IMDb, plot history of Supernatural and you being like, yeah, I know all these details. I want the details to be interesting, because if you know Supernatural, that that inspires you. It's like, oh, I know that I like that series, but again, I don't want you to just rehear what you already know. I want it to be like so like, what don't I know about them, right? And I think that's I think I found more positive reactions from that, because it's people want that extra knowledge. They don't want to have that knowledge repeated, right? They don't want to be told what they already know, but giving them that hook of, hey, these are based off of people but new stuff's happening. It's almost like I want to like scratch that itch of, you still like that TV series, so what if we could, continue it almost, and just, build upon that unique, a more unique lore that's kind of like a fan fiction almost. And so, having it familiar, but also keeping it unique. I don't really have any direct tips. It's just more of a, don't try to recreate it exactly, but keep to that foundation, right? Keep to the heart of what it is, make sure that it's, really calls to exactly what inspires you, pay attention to what inspires you about it. Because if it's just the idea that you just, think it's going to be really cool and your players are going to be really wowed by it, that's probably the wrong reason and the wrong approach. But again, for me, I loved the magic that was described in the Dresden Files, and I wanted that magic in D&D. I loved the way time works in Doctor Who, and I wanted that to work in High Point. I really liked how the concept of studying and finding the weaknesses to animals worked in Supernatural, and the weapons and the pantheons and the types of people that they interacted with, and the hierarchy of things, right? One of my saints is completely based off of Crowley. Not that, it's not the same character. It's not like I just say, oh yeah, he used to be on Earth and blah, blah, blah. But one of the saints, their storyline loosely follows the storyline of Crowley, basically, leveling up from a, lower end, he wasn't really a demon, but he was one of the saints, but he was basically a lower end who eventually worked his way up to being the ruler of hell, but not in the same respect, not in the same way, but the category of his character basically followed the same steps. And again, makes it really easy, because I created this character who has this progression into what I wanted him to become, and it was easy to follow the outline of what Supernatural had without taking, again, the details. So, learning about his past, you're not going to hear me recount all of the episodes or all, the entire season, first 3 seasons of Supernatural to learn his backstory. But, hearing that, he went from, basically the god of, merchants and the god of the trade, King of the Crossroads, into the King of Hell, which was, a situation that happened, not necessarily because he wanted it. And that's the thing. That was like one of the major differences. It's what happened to him. He went from essentially in the equivalent of King of the Crossroads to King of Hell in my realm, but he didn't want it. And it wasn't something that he sought after. It's not something that he did. He didn't do what Crowley in the episode and in the series did, but the progression, the steps that were taken were the same. Now, the details, the intentions, all of that are different. He wasn't just a human who became a demon who then became King of the Crossroads. None of that happened. He started out as the god of the deal and worked and essentially found himself as ruler of hell but it wasn't what he wanted. So again, unique story, unique hook. It's familiar. It follows what the expectation is, but the details fit more in line with High Point and more in line with D&D. So, keeping it familiar, keeping it unique, but again, the third leg to that, keeping it, you want to keep it familiar, you want to keep it unique, but you want to keep it, what's the word I'm looking for? I said it earlier. You want to keep it connected to your storyline and your campaign, because a lot of the things that you can run into either being too on the nose with the lore or too unique with it is, again, if you're not meeting certain expectations by being too unique, or if you're doing that uncanny valley thing where you're doing it too much and you're on the nose, what can end up happening is it doesn't jive with the rest of the D&D game, right? So if you're using that lore, it could disrupt the gameplay because it feels out of place. The characters may not fit in the setting. The conversations that you're trying to make may not fit the tone of the gameplay. And especially if you're trying really hard to make it, if nobody knows the reference, making it too unique isn't so much the problem. But if nobody knows the reference and you're really trying hard to like push the reference, that can also just be disrupting, because people, if they don't get the reference, they're going to kind of be lost. If you're expecting them to catch on to something, and you're not sure if they even know what the reference is to, that would be a bigger issue for the gameplay, because as a DM, I don't think it should ever be brought into a game where the players need out of game or outside knowledge in order to play. You know what I mean? Like I really feel like it's on the DM to bring the game into a tangible concept for the players and not expect the players to have, outside knowledge. And I don't mean like, the players don't know D&D, but if you're going to incorporate a lore, I like with Supernatural, I have supernatural concepts and guidelines for how I like certain things to happen in my realm, but I'm not going to make an encounter based off of details that my players would only have gotten by watching that series. Because that, to me, can also really hurt a gameplay, and really hurt a campaign, is if you're expecting them to come into the game with pre-established knowledge that is not established in the game or in game lore or in any reference material that you've provided, you're essentially setting them up to fail. Because unless, again, you've established this gameplay, this campaign, this gaming session is going to be oriented around this and everybody's on the same page, forcing them to have knowledge that they don't know that they should have or wouldn't be of interest to them, is basically just setting them up to fail. And I don't think you're going to enjoy it as much. They're not going to enjoy it as much. And in the end, it's either going to feel like disconnected, it's not going to feel like there's any continuity, or it's just going to, devolve into everyone just not really sure what's going on. So that's why I think that it is a good idea to have these. I really think that it's fantastic to let pop culture influence your lore building, influence your world. I think it's a good idea for people to take all of these inspirations, things that really excite your imagination. I think it's good because if it's fueling your imagination, you're more likely to retain it as that's what your interest is. And when you're trying to build a lore for a game like D&D, there are so many things to consider and so many things you could build that if you're not already a world builder, if you don't write novels, if you don't do this already constantly, you never really know what you're missing in terms of you're trying to go one direction and then as you play through it, you're realizing, oh, the players are doing all of these other things and interacting with my story in all of these other ways that I didn't think about, so I don't have any of these details. And, it can be overwhelming. So by allowing those pop culture references to influence you and to give you those guidelines, right? Remember, we're always talking about guidelines here. Remember, everything here on D&D Discussions is all about beyond the book. That includes not just the rules, the hard rule sets, but it includes things like lore, right? Don't just take what D&D gives you verbatim and just say that is the lore, right? Allowing the things that inspire you and that make you happy into your world will make you a better storyteller. It will make you a better narrator. It will make you a better DM, because it takes a lot of the strain of you having to create those things and remember them, and it makes it more into you've been inspired to create it, so you're more likely not only to use it, but you're more likely to enjoy using it than forcing yourself to come up with all of these different like rule sets or mechanics or even characters, right? Like, again, you don't have to call everybody the same name and have them all the same personality as your pop culture reference. But if your pop culture reference has 5 characters, right? Like, let's say take Scooby-Doo. Let's say you want to do like a murder mystery kind of thing, or you want to do like a haunting, for the holiday season. Base a couple of your NPCs off of the Scooby-Doo gang, but don't call them, Fred and Velma and Shaggy. Just make them have names, but give them like-minded, character personalities, right? Make one, like a high-class person. Make one kind of, like the scrubby homeless guy. Make them that reference, right? Make them somewhat familiar, but you don't have to lean in and make them completely the cast of Scooby-Doo. But you can use those references to make the setup a lot easier for yourself, right? If oh, hey, I just need 4 people. I'm just going to use this as my reference. So they're going to look like this. They're going to kind of act like this. And here's roughly like, if they get asked some questions, I know some backstory. And, having those loose ties allows you to plan how you're going to play the game, how you're going to narrate it, and less about the details of what you're narrating. I really hope that makes sense. I really hope that's an idea that has come across properly. I think I've covered it pretty well, but yeah, I'm a big proponent. I'm a big promoter of adding your favorite pop culture into your game. I think it's a very delicate balance of not doing too much, of bringing a recreation, but also not changing it to where people aren't sure what to expect, right? Have a general expectation of what you think the general idea is, and then change the details to where it feels unique, but it also fits with the setting, because you don't want to add something just because it sounds cool and then realize that it just doesn't work, doesn't fit, and won't play nice with the gameplay or with the party. Excuse me. So unless there's any questions from chat, I'm pretty sure that was everything I wanted to cover. I honestly was kind of worried. I thought this was going to take a lot longer to cover in terms of this topic, but I think that's really it. I think I said what I wanted to say. I really covered the main ideas, right? The 3 legs of this are, make it familiar, make it unique, make it fit. I think those are good rules to live by in terms of trying to implement pop culture into your realm, because you don't want people, you don't want them to feel like they're just reliving something that they already know, and that you're just basically stealing it because you're lazy. But you also don't want to change it so much that people lose the reference or are frustrated because they can't keep up, right? Because it's too many things have changed. That's my approach. I hope it works for you. I hope it made sense, but I think it's a great thing. I think everybody should, I don't think everyone should do it. I just think that everybody should consider, consider allowing those influences. Again, you don't have to go after them. You don't have to think about what are my favorite things and how do I add them in. But, if you have an idea and it's inspired by something, let it roll. Like let the idea flourish and do your best to see how it would fit in your game. Because especially if you're playing with people who would get the reference, it is really nice when you can kind of do that slow build up, and when they finally get it, and you see that they're on the same page as you. A lot of the times it's a really cool moment that everybody gets to where it all kind of clicks, and then everybody jumps on that same page, and then they're all having a little bit more fun because now it's that unique aspect of they get to find out what is what they know and what is what they think it is, and what did you do to it? Like, what did you change? And with the right balance, it can really inspire a lot of players to do different things, try to interact in different ways, and it can really just like spice up gameplay and kind of rejuvenate maybe either a gaming session or a campaign that's kind of lost a little bit of luster. It can kind of help rejuvenate people's ideas about what's going on, and kind of again provide a hook for them to keep on going and push it a little bit harder. But with that, I'm happy with that. I think that was everything I wanted to discuss. We got all the questions from chat answered. We got the questions from the Discord answered. So I think I might just call it there. I think that was a good first Friday stream. I am enjoying Fridays so much more already. Not streaming yesterday felt so good for me. Just with work at the end of the year has just been getting kind of more difficult. And Thursdays have just been really stressful in terms of still having one more day to work, but then having to do the stream. So having a Friday to where work's behind me, I don't work on the weekends, so I just absolutely, drop it off my mind. I have no time limit on Fridays, so if I do go over, I don't have to worry about losing sleep for work. This is actually a lot better. So D&D Discussions, you can absolutely expect to continue Mondays and Fridays from now on, especially for the near future, at least for the rest of the year, we'll be doing that, minus holidays or whenever I'm out of town. Mondays, D&D Discussions will continue to be homebrew review. Fridays will continue to be these open discussions. I still don't have a name for the Friday stream, so I'm gonna be asking people in Discord soon after I do some work cleaning a bunch of stuff up this weekend. I want your guys' opinion on what we should call Fridays, because we do have, D&D Discussions obviously is the general title. We have homebrew review, which is on Mondays, so I need a general title for Fridays. So if you're watching this on YouTube, drop me a comment. If you are in chat, or go ahead and join the Discord so you can drop me some suggestions. I'll probably, if I do get a couple, I'll maybe do a poll. If I only get one or two, I'll just figure out which one I like the most, and we'll see from there. I think I'm going to call it here. So thank you so much for joining me. If you are here in Twitch chat, thank you very much for joining. I appreciate you. If you do want to join the Discord, I'll drop the link one more time in chat. If you're watching us on YouTube in the future, and if you liked anything you saw here, or if you missed anything, you can obviously go back through the video. We also have all of our previous live streams on YouTube at MisfitGamersStudios. So if you haven't seen all of our stuff, or if you want to go back and look at the deep dive I did on High Point, you can watch all of those live streams, unedited right now on my YouTube channel. Eventually, we'll be getting some content edited in the future, but for right now, it's just the raw audio, or it's just the raw live stream. I still do pop-up games on the weekends. I'm pretty busy this weekend, so if I do anything, I will be on Sunday or Monday. No, it won't be on Monday. It'll only be on Sunday if I do a weekend stream, but I might be too busy this weekend. But I will be back on Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for D&D Discussions Homebrew Review. We don't have a submitted item just yet, so it's probably going to be something that Kage or I have created for our realms, unless we get something submitted via Discord. So again, you can submit us ideas for topics that you want to hear us talk about on D&D Discussions. You can submit ideas for homebrew for us to review, or you can just submit questions that you want to hear us talk about. Or you want me to answer on the stream like I did earlier. So I'm rambling. I still don't have a great outro for this. I'm still trying to figure out everything I want to say on the outro. And it's pretty much just coming out as a big jumble. So If you have any ideas on what I should do for my outro, also give me that in chat, on comments, or in Discord. Anyway, I'm going to head out of here. I hope you all enjoyed the stream. I hope you have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend ahead of you. Join me again on Monday for more D&D discussions, where we'll be doing another homebrew review. Take care. Have a wonderful night. I'm out of here. Enjoy yourselves, gamers.